Asylum seekers, refugees and economic migrants. On an unstable globe, more people than ever before are on the move, and it's creating a political crisis across the Western world. Here in Britain, illegal arrivals on small boats from France are at record levels. The government is under immense pressure to bring those levels down, but also to find ways of housing them that doesn't cost the taxpayer billions. But this isn't the first time that Britain has seen a huge influx of arrivals. Indeed, over thousands of years, Britain has been a popular choice for those seeking a new life. It's a cliche, but it's also true that Britain was built upon waves of migration, some of them violent, but most of them peaceful. This week we'll explore those waves and the often profound impact that they've had upon Britain, from the Romans to the modern day. Welcome to History Counts. If you like learning the history behind the stories in the headlines, and if, like me, you believe that there are lessons to be learned for the present, then please do subscribe. I make a new video every week. In a future episode, I want to deal with the general history of the migrant crisis the world is facing at the moment, and the specific history of the small boats crisis facing Britain. But today, I want to look at Britain's history with migration generally. The first wave of migration that we know about, mostly because early Britons didn't keep records, was the Roman one. Julius Caesar famously came to Britain a couple of times, but he didn't stay. The Roman invasion of Britain proper began in 43 AD. It wasn't just Romans from Rome that came to Britain. The occupying forces brought with them people from all over the empire, from Syria, the Balkans, and northern Africa. Many made Britain their permanent home, and though most of the population remained indigenous, the Roman culture came to dominate politics and economics. When the Roman occupation of Britain ended some centuries later as the Western Roman Empire collapsed, the population of Britain declined dramatically and the country entered what's commonly known as the Dark Ages. It was a period of huge war, strife, and yes, migration. As the empire fell in on itself, Germanic tribes crossed the North Sea looking for new land and seeking to fill the vacuum left by Rome. Those coming were from tribes like the Saxons, the Angles, and the Jutes. The number that came is a matter of fierce historical debate, but what is undisputed is the immense impact they had when they got here. The southern parts of the British Isles became culturally Germanic, and the land became known as Angleland, or England. The great enemies of the Anglo-Saxons were, of course, the Vikings. They were Scandinavian raiders who attacked the east coast of England. Many of them ended up staying, and at various times they ruled significant chunks of England. Place names like York bear the mark of the Viking wave. Then in 1066 came perhaps the most famous of all the waves of migration into Britain, the Norman invasion. Relatively speaking, a very small number of Normans arrived in England with William the Conqueror, but those that did arrive became the nobility, and their influence was therefore massively oversized. They gave us many of the French words in the English language, and their violent conquest set the tone for England's high Middle Ages. For the next few hundred years, the makeup of Britain's population remained largely the same. Indeed, in 1610, it's estimated that only 10,000 of the 300,000 people that lived in London were born overseas. But as Britain's power grew, its involvement in the African slave trade grew as well. From the 15th century onwards, unwilling Africans found themselves here in Britain. By the late 1700s, there's evidence of tens of thousands of Africans living in the country. Though of course those numbers are tiny compared to the huge numbers that were transported across the Atlantic to the New World. Britain also became home to those fleeing religious persecution on the European continent. In the 1500s, French Huguenots, Protestants, started arriving after a massacre in their home country. In the early 1700s, a wave of Germans came to Britain fleeing French invasion. It was also around this time that the tradition began of Polish migration from their home country to Britain began. Many were fleeing political and religious persecution, and by 1900, over 80,000 Eastern Europeans were living in Britain. During World War II, when the country was conquered by the Nazis, that number increased dramatically, and after the war, the British government offered citizenship to 200,000 Poles that were living in the UK who might not want to return to their now Soviet-ruled country. The Second World War brings us on to the story of Jewish immigration to this country. In 1290, Jews were actually expelled from England, but as the centuries wore on, the Jewish community began to grow again. In the 19th century, many Jewish people fled persecution and anti-Semitism in Russia and came to Britain. In fact, public concern about the level of immigration to the country at this time led to the 1905 Aliens Act. By the 1940s, 400,000 Jewish people lived in the UK, 100,000 of them fleeing Nazi Germany. And what about migration from the British Empire? Well, before the Second World War, the numbers were surprisingly small. There were communities of sailors from India, China and Africa in port cities around the UK, but the records show that the numbers involved were tiny. Immigration from the Commonwealth, however, rose rapidly after the Second World War, when the 1948 Act gave citizens of the Empire the right to live and work in Britain. By 1962, it's estimated that 500,000 people had taken up that offer and moved to the UK. After that, tighter controls were implemented, but even then, 50,000 people a year on average came to the UK to work from the Commonwealth. It was during this period that immigration to Britain began to become a big political issue, especially for those on the hard right. In 1968, Enoch Powell gave his now infamous Rivers of Blood speech, raging against immigration from the Commonwealth. Racism was commonplace. The issue grew in political importance and moved into the mainstream of British politics when, from 2004, an expanded EU allowed free movement from countries in Eastern Europe, which became ever more controversial. That sentiment drove the rise of UKIP, of Nigel Farage, but also, many would argue, the decision that Britain took in the 2016 referendum to leave the European Union. Since Brexit, a loosening of migration rules has seen over 2 million people come to this country legally. There's also been, of course, the massive rise in the number of people arriving here illegally, mostly on small boats across the Channel. The government now promises to reduce the number of visas they give out for people to arrive here legally each year, and also to crack down on the number of illegal arrivals, mostly in small boats across the Channel. It is those illegal arrivals, even though they make up a smaller part of the total arrivals, that cause the most political controversy. Rules created to protect refugees after the failure to protect Jewish people in World War II are now under more strain than ever before. In fact, on my channel you can find a video on the European Convention on Human Rights and the debates that are going on around that at the moment. The issue of immigration is becoming ever more important in British politics. This country is a melting pot created over thousands of years of migrationary waves, and the current situation is not unique, but with more refugees on the move around the world than probably ever before, it shows no signs of going away. The debate around these issues is undeniably toxic, and the questions that politicians, that we the public, have to answer, like what level of migration is right and how do we help those who are most in need around the world, are becoming harder and harder to answer. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch History Counts. If you've enjoyed this video, please do subscribe and leave your feedback in the comments below.